So welcome everyone to the third talk of this January Encounter of the Heart retreat at Mountain Cloud. 1/23/21. Today's date is not just a palindrome, it's a chiasm, a structure that shows up in poetic texts and in music as the rondo form, that ABCBA. In poetry and poetic narrative, chiastic structure is a way of making meaning. Form and content cohere, and what's in the center reverberates throughout. In music, it's a structure of balance and return, elegant, repeated in nature in countless forms of recursion. Leaves and trees, for example, the patterns that make them, going and returning, repeating over and over again, always with a slight difference on a slightly different scale. The same is true for coastlines, clouds, broccoli, plants, even some forms of fire. When Zen says, "Come home to your native ground," that includes all of this. And it's all right now. This brings to mind a quote about the natural world and the invitation to awaken moment to moment. It's from Annie Dillard, great naturalist. She writes, "I come down to the water to cool my eyes, but everywhere I look, I see fire. That which isn't flint is tender, and the whole world sparks and flames." That which isn't flint is tender, and the whole world sparks and flames. Dogen said about this practice, "Who would waste the spark from a flint stone?" Anything can be that spark. A sound, a gesture, a sensation, all the more oxygenated by the stillness of our sitting. A monk asked Joshu, "What is meditation?" Joshu said, "It's not meditation." The monk asked, "Why is it not meditation?" Joshu said, "It's alive. It's alive." Yesterday in the Q&A, someone asked about the relationship of poetry and koans. Is there a kinship between these forms of expression? Or if a difference, is it only nuanced? They're finely nuanced. Poetry can certainly make the mind leap. Like beauty, if we really face it, we are changed. Also with nature. Yesterday I mentioned a line from the great haiku master Baso, who said, If you want to learn about a tree, go to the tree. Let nothing stand between you. This is pointing toward the way of koans. But if you really meet a koan, there's no in between. You become the koan. Your separate self disappears. It can happen that the whole world disappears, then comes to life in a completely new way. 10,000 myriad things, each perfectly distinct, and yet one body, one existence, one boundlessness. Ryoun Roshi says, koans are a message from the oneness world. They're a means to practice and a presenting, a full exposure, conveying the empty, infinite dynamism, the marvel, the absolute wonder of what this real human heart is. There is a poetic aspect to this, the invitation to our deepest curiosity, to unqualified openness, to the unknown. And then there's the leap, not just from one thing to another, but hands free, empty, maybe gone. In an essay about koans, Joan Sutherland writes, practice is about making us fetchable. It helps us to recognize what gets in the way of our being fetched. And then it gives us a method to deconstruct the obstacle. Before turning to a koan, just one more quote that resonates with this. It's from Cynthia Ocelli. For a seed to achieve its greatest expression, she writes, it must come completely undone. The shell cracks, its insides come out, and everything changes. To someone who doesn't understand growth, it would look like complete destruction. The shell cracks, its insides come out, and everything changes. It's alive. It's alive. So yesterday, we looked at the transmission of the Dharma from Shakyamuni Buddha to Kashyapa, the so-called origin story of Zen. Buddha holds up a flower. Today, I'd like to turn the page to Kashyapa transmitting the Dharma to Ananda, the next ancestor in the formal line of masters, this teaching that we inherit. It's case 22 of the Gateless Gate, and this also appears as case 2 in the transmission of light. Kashyapa's flagpole. Here's the case. Ananda asked Kashyapa in all earnestness. The world-honored one transmitted the brocade robe to you. What else did he transmit to you? Kashyapa called, Ananda. Ananda replied, Yes, Master. Kashyapa said, Knock down the flagpole at the gate. It's often said that the most beautiful recorded transmission is from Shakyamuni Buddha to Kashyapa. The whole assembly gathered at Vulture Peak to hear Shakyamuni Buddha offer one last sermon, one last public teaching. Everyone is waiting. Buddha holds up a flower and twirls it. Just seeing it, Kashyapa breaks into a smile. A flower, a smile. This is transmission without a word. No logic, no philosophy. As Ryoun Roshi puts it, the truth is so simple. No condition, no qualification. It applies to everyone. Now I entrust Mahakashyapa with this, the Buddha said. What did Shakyamuni entrust? Kashyapa's exchange with Ananda conveys it. Not with no words, but just one word. Such a beautiful beginning. And of course, that's right now. Ananda was the cousin of Shakyamuni Buddha, said to be born on the day of Buddha's enlightenment, some 30 years younger. He is known for this brilliant intellect and absolutely flawless audiographic memory. Remarkable gifts, but they seem to have been an impediment to fully realizing, to his putting this matter, this great matter, to rest. It took a long time in a very auspicious context. Because of Ananda's keen memory and dedication, Buddha asked him to serve as attendant, keeping him nearby to hear every teaching and also recounting past teachings that Ananda might not have heard. I mean, in the sutras, some of them say he remembered word for word some of the teachings that he never heard. You know, it's this wild capacity. The Buddha taught in an oral culture. He didn't write anything down. And this is why the sutras, so many of them begin, "Thus I have heard," or "Thus I hear." It's very much part of the sutra. I find Ananda's awakening story inspiring and poignant. On the one hand, it's almost mythic, and on the other, very human. All those years attending Shakyamuni Buddha, watching, listening, and, unable to awaken. He couldn't dissolve the sense of separation, the construct of his identity, the scaffolding of his own mind. When Shakyamuni Buddha died, his closest disciples are, gathering, wondering how to carry on the Dharma. And they plan an assembly, a summit of sorts. But, Ananda, who's got everything at the ready to speak all of this teaching, he can't be part of this assembly because he hasn't had an experience. He's unawakened. As the story goes, it's so clear that his participation is vital. And I'm sure they, encouraged him, but Ananda felt it. This imperative for the Dharma to be conveyed. So he determines to sit with, unabated energy and concentration, throwing himself at the sword, it is said, for 1 week, the time until the summit. And in that 1 week, he has a glimpse. It's enough that the arhats recognized him and urged Kashyapa to include him in this assembly of disciples who would carry on the Dharma. Actually, when Kazan gives the background to this story and the transmission of light, he says, or maybe it's in his Teisho, but he, it's not that Ananda had a deep awakening or really saw himself. That how he demonstrated what he could do was he enters the room where the arhats are through the keyhole. So it's that's why I say mythic, but what's so touching about that is it's, that level of capacity, apparently, but just not seeing his own true heart. So he continued to practice for another 20 years with Kashyapa, as Kashyapa's attendant. And that's the time of the scene in this case, this exchange, when Ananda would have been about 70 years old. All that practicing, deepening this glimpse, exploring this world, carried along by wisdom and compassion, immersed, and yet still a trace of doubt. Did I miss something? Is there something lacking? Something more? So familiar, that trace of doubt. It reminds me of the story that I touched on yesterday about Ryoun Roshi. After years of Zen practice and koan training, he was living in London, a foreign culture, challenge of the language, in a middle management position that was demanding but not very satisfying, just not the right fit. So he's struggling. And one day in the train station, commuting to the office, he set down his briefcase. He just stopped and set down his briefcase. I think it was just, a very ordinary moment. But suddenly, everything set down. Everything put to rest. Up until that moment, Ryoun Roshi said, there was still a trace of doubt. This kind of doubt qualifies as one of the 5 hindrances. We've been hearing so much about, because it's helpful to have them in mind, to be aware. And doubt is the one that is most insidious. Henry's been talking about this because it can keep us from practicing. So, I don't know, a week or so ago, I went to the mountain cloud site, as I often do. It's a wonderful resource. I'm sure you know it. And recently, one of Henry's talks was posted, I think from about a year ago, or perhaps, I think it was about a year ago. It's a talk on the Heart Sutra. And he brings up the 5 hindrances in a way that is really helpful. So, they are desire, aversion, sleepiness and dullness, restlessness and worry, and doubt. But looking at them this time, Henry briefly describes each one and then looks into what might turn it, what might, turn it around. So, for example, with desire, we experience desire as something we want, but it's really an unsettling feeling. It's uncomfortable. I think that I sometimes conjure desire to stir things up, to spur some change. But it's a form of suffering. It's a suffering that can be a fulcrum, but it's an artifice. I am reminded about how the masters use all this dualistic language to, open up a non-dual world. Still, the beauty I heard in what Henry's talking about is that from the perspective of infinite love, desire can transform into loving and appreciating. It can be morph into that and be transformed. And then aversion, Henry suggested, it transforms into humbling. I don't want that. How would you dissolve that? How would you turn that invitation to humility? I give in. I surrender. I accept. I relinquish what I think I know, things just as they are. That's Currently my favorite definition of humility. Things just as they are. There's no aversion in that. And then sleepiness and dullness or reluctance. This one's sometimes called sloth and torpor. And in this particular moment when he was working this out for now, Henry said, it transforms into awe. This sense of wonder. Henry said the deep, buzzing energy of awe. Reminded of Master Foyen, this fundamental instruction. Arouse wonder. That will dissolve, oxygenate, expand any sleepiness. As Henry says, if it doesn't take a nap. And then restlessness and torpor, restlessness and worry, transforms into compassion. As Henry put it, love the anxious, unsettled, worrying being. It's painful, this anxiety. Compassion allows, imbues our sitting with expansion and release, this allowing, this spaciousness that's ever ready, never exhausted, capable of holding anything. And finally, doubt. The way to transmute doubt, Henry suggested, is surrender. Doubt being seen here as the opposite of trust. Talk a lot about trust. Entrust yourself, and you can't get to trust without surrender. So intimately linked. I think Henry said, doubt can't reach a surrendered heart. Surrender to what? This. Right now. As Sekito said, open your hands and walk innocent. Whatever makes this practice difficult, challenging, is precisely the that can also expand it, that can open us to it, to the heart of what it is to be human. The same goes for our wounds, our flaws, our sense of lack, the innate capacity, this capacious love. We've called it infinite love, original love. It can transmute these wounds, scars, into wisdom and compassion, allowing us to see who we really are, and then to offer ourselves. That's what happens. You just really want to give it away. So freely. I mean, again, this giving, receiving. Ananda asked in all earnestness, the world-honored one transmitted the brocade robe to you. What else did he transmit to you? Is there something else, something more, something beyond my experience? Kashyapa surely sensed his ripeness. Ananda. Yes, Master. What more could there be? The answer is more familiar than the question, says Mumon in his verse to the case. Like two hands clapping, a single sound, whole world swallowed, whole world allowed. Ananda must have been transfixed, suspended the sound. Then Kashyapa gives one more push. Knock down the flagpole at the gate. In other words, it's finished. It's done. It's complete. Everything resolved. Already resolved. Just gone. As the Heart Sutra says, gone, gone, gone beyond. And in that great freedom, everything unleashed. The flag raised on a pole at the gate to the temple was a sign that face-to-face interviews or a Dharma talk were going on. So total is this awakening to an awake world, this wide open world. Not only is the flag lowered, the whole flagpole is knocked down. And actually, as much as it mattered, even that last push is extra. Just Ananda. Everything included. Or just, yes, Master. What is transmission? A flower, a word, this moment. Ryoun Roshi has said on various occasions, this is the only thing, including you, yourself. If you get it, you get the whole universe. Whatever it is, that one thing, maybe the sound, sitting there. This is the only thing. It's you. Get it and you get the whole universe. In other words, you come home. You get what is already yours. Totally yours. Such abundance, such freedom, such love. Everywhere you turn, it's you. Everything that happens, your body freely functioning, your whole body, just, and so I'd like to close with a word from Dogen. It's from On the Endeavor of the Way. And he's been describing this world. He says, this being so, the zazen of even one person at one moment imperceptibly accords with all things and fully resonates through all time. Thus, in the past, future, and present of the limitless universe, this zazen carries on the Buddha's transformation endlessly and timelessly. Each moment of zazen, of this sitting, is equally the wholeness of practice, equally the wholeness of realization. Practice awakening. Equally whole. One fact. Pouring itself out. Coming home to us. Absolute, unabated support. So let's return to our practice. A gift to the world. Thank you for your practice.